Performers, everything that you know and have been taught about core training is probably wrong. For me, at drama school, core training meant a bunch of crunches, a 3-minute plank, and bring Sally up, bring Sally down. I'm sure many of you can relate to the torture that was. And not only does that miss some absolutely vital parts of training the core, but it's also just not the most effective way to build core strength. In fact, most dancers we see train their core basically just through isometric holds, things like planks, so things where you're holding a static position. But a truly strong core isn't built by avoiding movement, it's built by controlling movement. And we'll go into exactly why this is the case a bit later on and why we should be moving the spine for effective core training. But if you take nothing else from this video, remember this: the core should be trained through movement to build strength. Then we can use anti-movement exercises to reinforce control. Put another way, the most effective way to build core strength is simply to move your spine. Joints are meant to move. We've got 33 vertebrae in our spine that are meant to move. And it's vital that we're strong enough in large ranges of motion, not just that one static plank position. So to build real strength, we want to train muscles close to failure through a full range of motion. And whilst things like isometric holds, like planks, do create some tension, you're absolutely getting a fair amount of time under tension, they're harder to progress without simply adding more time. And often, which is the case, other muscles tend to fatigue first before your core actually gets to that stimulus point. So I'm sure many of you can relate to holding a plank and your shoulders being the thing that feels like it's getting worked the most rather than actually targeting your core. So build strength through movement first, then use isometrics as more of a control tool or more of a proprioceptive tool. It's important to note here that your core isn't just your abs. So it's not just those six-pack muscles. Yes, it does obviously include the rectus abdominis, those six-pack muscles, but it also includes your obliques, your transverse abdominis, your multifidus, your diaphragm even, your pelvic floor, erectus spinae, your quadratus lumborum, to name a few. And these muscles don't exist just to hold you still. They exist to produce force, absorb force, and control motion of the spine. So that's why we want to train the core through 5 key movement patterns. We want to train flexion, extension, lateral flexion, rotation, and then finally, stuff like planks, anti-movement exercises. So how do each of these different categories work? Examples, let's dive into it. So the first one is flexion. This is simply bending the spine forwards. Loaded, controlled movements like cable crunches, toes to bar, knee raises, compression lifts, things like weighted sit-ups. They're all amazing for building strength through a large range of motion. This is super important. Flexion of the spine really does use those six-pack muscles, your rectus abdominis. This is the one that most people feel relatively comfortable doing. Lots of crunches that I'm sure you will have done before, but there are more effective ways to strengthen this and to make sure we're getting to that stimulus point. Again, remember here that to effectively train your muscles, this goes for any muscle, doesn't just have to be the core, that we want to train that muscle group close to failure. So if you can do hundreds of crunches in a row, it's not very time efficient. You're going to be there for a very long time trying to get to that stimulus point. You might be overcompensating in other areas. So again, stuff like crunches, if you're doing hundreds and hundreds to try and get to that stimulus point, you might end up trying to use a bit of momentum, or you start gripping your neck, stuff like that. So there's ways that we can achieve a good stimulus for the core in a more effective, time efficient way. Again, stuff like adding weight or adding doing it on a cable machine. So stuff like cable crunches are a really, really good flexion exercise. Also, trying to get our body to move through a large range of motion. So stuff like toes to bar work, where we're taking the legs all the way, we're getting a huge range of motion, may be a more effective way at building that core strength over than just crunches. Again, crunches are still a very good exercise and we should absolutely be including them, especially if you're relatively new to kind of strength training or you haven't trained the core in a while. Crunches can be a great place to start to build up that strength. But Often with dancers, we just need a little bit more stimulus, and we also need to be able to continuously, progressively overload. So continuously make it harder for us without just adding more fatigue and just more and more and more reps. So that is flexion. Extension is the other way. So this mainly trains our posterior core, so the muscles on the back side of our body. This flexion is bending forwards, extension is extending the spine up, bending back a little bit. So this supports posture, it supports your arabesques, helps with spinal integrity. Really, a lot of people that struggle with lower back pain often need to work some extension into their training. Things like back extensions are really, really good. Stuff like your good mornings, your deadlifts, and even stuff like QL raises as well to maintain that nice, strong, good posture. Again, taking these relatively close to failure. Normally we would say 2 to 3-ish reps in reserve. The big way to see that you've got to that stimulus point is if you have an involuntary loss of velocity. So the last few reps, without you intentionally slowing down, are slowing down because you're getting to that stimulus point. All of those muscle fibers are being recruited and you're really struggling to kind of finish off the reps. That involuntary loss of velocity, the reps are slowing down, means that we've got to that mechanical tension point, which is key for building strength. So that's extension. Then we have lateral flexion. This strengthens the obliques and QL muscles, and this is side to side bending. So lateral flexion, simply bending side to side. Again, really, really important for balance for stuff like side leaps or when we're doing tilts, stuff like that. If you're a dancer and you're doing that kind of movement, really important that we are able to bend the side, laterally flex the spine, and then bring ourselves back up. Weighted side bends, cable side bends, side plank variations, especially stuff where we are moving the hips in and out, all perfect, all really, really good for building strength. Again, similar to that extension, often people who have lower back pain or sit into their lower back quite a fair bit often really struggle with lateral flexion and extension movements, and that's just because they're not strong enough. So we need to start incorporating these. It can take pressure out of your lower back, place it into other muscle groups of the core, and you'll feel a lot more stronger and a lot more resilient. The fourth category is rotation, and rotation trains the obliques, the deep stabilizers, and produces force and controls torque. Again, very important for things like pirouettes, for dynamic movements where we are turning pretty quickly. Rotation is really easy to see. It is literally just your body moving, your spine moving over your hips. So your hips staying in one place or going the other way as your torso rotates. Obviously super important in dance, and things like cable rotations, med ball throws, different variations of kind of hollow rocks, any type of movement where we are rotating that spine across its axis and using those obliques to pull us back. Again, many lower back issues, many kind of injuries, niggles, pains comes from a lack of rotational control and a lack of rotational strength. So definitely worthwhile including some of those types of movements in your training week by week. All of this movement-based training builds strength by creating that mechanical tension through meaningful ranges of motion. Again, to sum all of that up, to build effective strength, we want to be firstly training our muscle groups close to failure through a large range of motion. And if we do those two things and we get that involuntary loss of velocity, so we get that slowing down of the rep at the end of your set, you know you're creating mechanical tension, and that mechanical tension, without getting too scientific, is the key stimulus. It is the main primary driving factor of building strength. So that's why we like to continuously add weight to things. It's why we like to continuously look for variations that are easy to progress, and that week by week we can add load, we can add intensity, we can add even more range of motion, those kinds of things. It's not just let's do another 10 crunches on top of the 100 that we're already doing. Finally, that fifth category is anti-movement. So then once we have built up that required strength, anti-movement can do a good job. Things like planks, dead bugs, Pallof presses, single arm carries, plank variations. They're all really good exercises. I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't be training those anti-movement exercises. They're still incredibly, incredibly useful. because they're very good at improving your proprioception. So they're very good at training your brain's understanding of where it is in space and how to keep your pelvis and your rib cage connected, how to keep that trunk from kind of moving around too much. So that ability to resist unwanted motion. But to build strength, they're not as effective as training the core through movement. So think of it like this: movement builds the engine and anti-movement almost improves the steering. That's kind of how we like to think about it. So again, you wouldn't expect to build really big, strong, powerful legs by just doing a wall sit. And so you shouldn't expect to build a powerful core just by holding still. So yeah, we can use those anti-movement exercises to reinforce positions to make sure that our body knows how to kind of hold still whilst maybe our limbs are moving. That's a really good way of training the core, absolutely. But that should just be an addition to the type of core training that's going to build effective strength, which is movement. So how to structure your core training. So for a complete core routine, you want to pick one exercise from each of those movement categories. You're going to want to have some flexion, some extension, some lateral flexion, some rotation, and then on top of that, the kind of icing on top of the cake, some anti-movement properties, some anti-movement exercises. Try and aim to be in, I would say, around a kind of 8 reps up to maybe 15, 20 reps. Again, you can go up to about 30 reps and still get a good stimulus, but if we're just doing loads and loads and loads of volume, we can often get to a point where we're fatiguing too much, and it's going to be a struggle to actually get into that real hypertrophy zone rather than it being more endurance. So we really want to kind of be training close to that failure point. Again, that's why weighted exercises, cable exercises are so useful, is because we can get to that stimulus point more effectively. So I'd say, you could go down to maybe 5 reps, but mainly for core exercises, we would stick to around 8 to 15-ish reps. You don't have to train all of those 5 things in one session. You can spread them off across the week. Of course you can, but if you were going into the gym and you were looking for just a core circuit to do, then we would say pick an exercise from each of those categories and build upon it. Try and aim for maybe 8 to 15-ish reps. For holds, we would suggest maybe anywhere from that 30 seconds-ish up to about 60 seconds. Again, you can do more. I'm not saying that you can't do more than a minute plank, for example, but you'd probably be better off trying to progress it in a different way. So, and keep the timing slightly less. Less build up of fatigue, just less time in the gym, and it's going to be more effective for actually building strength. So maybe instead of just trying to add more time, maybe you look to actually add some weight to your back, something like that, or do a different variation that's slightly harder. So maybe increasing lever length. So maybe you do a long plank, something along those lines. Again, crunch variations. Instead of just adding more reps, try and find a way of making that exercise harder, whether it is through a different, harder variation of that same movement, adding weight, adding intensity, adding like half reps or something like that, where we're doing more stimulus, but it's not just more fatigue. So I really hope that that has kind of changed the way that you think of core training. I hope that the slightly more sciencey based stuff about mechanical tension was all making sense, but that is how we like to approach core training at Prime to Perform anyway. We train the core like any other muscle group. We don't train it in a static way at all. And we have actually created an ebook on core training. So if you want access to our top 25 core exercises for dancers and for performers, all you have to do is pop across to Instagram and DM us the word core, all in capital letters, and we will send that across to you on there. But there we have it. Core training for dancers and performers. Make sure that we are training flexion, extension, lateral flexion, rotation, and then the cherry on top of the pie, some anti-movement exercises, but make sure you're training that core through a large range of motion, you're training close to failure, and you're always looking to progressively overload. Those are the key things that you need to focus on if you do want to build your core strength.